poor girl had been unhappy here. Vocation turned out to be a summer fling, and by the start of the school year, she had already begun questioning herself. Wasn't true calling supposed to stare down other truths, ugly truths, the menial and mean realities of school boards and parents and lesson plans, insolent children? There was another path set for her, another place she needed to be. Why had she come to this small town? What had been the point? What had called her here? She would not have to face the question for long. Wasn't long for the world. Nobody approached the body, except to note how unnaturally cold it was. No need to search out a pulse. Must have happened early in the night. Must have been cooling for hours. When dawn broke, a young officer, a foreigner, was the first to notice she was sweating. Might she still be alive? Is she transparent? The uncorrupted corpse of a saint turning diaphanous before his eyes? He called out. The medics were just then arriving and kneeled by the figure in disbelief. Was this some kind of joke? The officers didn't know what they meant until, struck by a few more beams of morning, it became apparent. This was no corpse, but a perfect likeness in ice. What kind of sick killer leaves an ice sculpture? Somebody said. Oh, okay, so we're assuming she's dead? Someone replied. The young officer, the foreigner, Sancho, wasn't paying attention though. Something bothered him. It wasn't just that this girl who he had never met, but had heard of, was the only other outsider here apart from himself, although she had come by choice and he by accident. It was also that this all seemed strikingly familiar. He remembered what was happening. It took him a while. He racked his brain, and it finally came out of some dark, somehow wholesome part of his mind that this was a story that had been told him by his grandmother when he was a child. There was more to it, though, but the main point was a young woman. She will come to the town. She will disappear. She will leave ice behind in perfect semblance of herself. And by the time the ice has melted, by the time day has claimed it, the town will be no more as it has been. Somebody get this ice into a fridge. Huh? Who said that? It's the new guy. Oh, new guy. What do you know about it? Well, nothing, but you hired me because I have expertise in, not this, nobody has expertise in whatever this is, but at the very least, we ought to be preserving the evidence, right? Sure, good point. Okay, somebody get this ice into a fridge. Okay, that buys us time, assuming Grandma's stories are true, Sancho thought to himself. And at this point, that seems like a fair, if fairly absurd, assumption. Sancho went back to the hospice where he was staying. A few clumsy attempts at penetrating memory, at extracting clues from those old childhood stories. There was also, for Sancho, occasion to feel comforted. Comforted at being useful. He had convalesced a while in this town. It had generously taken him in, and it felt proper to give something back. He was staying in a large, scant-haired woman's inn. Her hospitality was occasioned as mysteriously as occluded, but no fickleness of attention could efface the kindness of having taken him in the first place. Albeit he could pay, and would, generously, but the woman didn't know that, unless she had recognized his military uniform for the high-rank attire that it was. Sancho settled on the latter being plausible, more than plausible, but didn't dwell. Whatever the case, she was being plenty generous, and apart from the income which would be restored to him once his unit found their stranded comrade, Sancho also felt that contributing to the local police force would be a way to pay not just her, but the entire town back. And the fact that they happened to be dealing with a particularly uncommon species of criminality precisely during his stay here, well, that was just all the more fortunate. Not in absolute terms, of course, but it meant his assistance was all the more called for. "Eggs, is it?" the innkeeper asked assertively as he entered the main hall the next morning. No, thank you. I'll be getting breakfast. Skipping breakfast. Might have lunch in town, though. Lovely day for a walk." In truth, the weather never affected his intention to spend most daylight hours outside, however clouded. He couldn't abide by the smell of chemical hygiene in such places, a cheap, safe, undemanding regime of cleanliness that the mistress of this house kept to. One couldn't blame her, though. She did do it all herself, after all. No service. Suit yourself. You're unlikely to be anybody else's size, after all. She often added half-whispered cynical whimsy to her sentences. Sancho could not well say if they were proverbs or spontaneous products of a proverbially disposed mind, the sort that can proliferate in small towns. He went outside.